Hey everyone, in this tutorial we'll go ahead and we'll create a Giphy application in React, and by the end of this video we'll have a finished result looking sort of like this, where we type it in and it renders out some Giphies back to you. Now in later videos we'll go ahead and we'll style this, we'll deploy it to AWS, we'll make it look pretty, we'll make it look like a production level API level application. But for now, in this video, we'll go ahead and get the architecture set up. We'll set up React, we'll Redux Saga, we'll use immutable.js, we'll use best practices, best architecture practices, and by the end of this video, we'll have our folder structure looking similar to this. We'll have our Sagas, we'll have our reducers, we'll have our store. This is production level, something you'd see in an actual job. This is how you probably would want to set it up if you're working for a company. Giphy will give you a URL, which you can use a query to pass on a certain search term. Let's say we pass on cats, and Giphy will process that request, and it will later on give you a response that is full of a bunch of GIFs. The way our architecture will be set up is we'll have a store. That store will have a root reducer, and that reducer have one reducer. We will use that in order to save our state, store our state, and then later on we'll have a Saga, which will handle all our API calls. And that Saga for now will just have one Saga, this API key, and this is what we're going to use in order to be able to call an API from Giphy. So basically, they require this to authenticate you. So this is to make sure that, hey, this is a user that's logged in, he's using our API, and we'll authenticate him. If you don't have the API, it's not going to work. So you take this API key, and this is an example API call right here. Now let's go to the docs, and inside of the docs, where is it? API endpoint, search endpoint. Right here, this is the Giphy API, search API. It's just /gif/search, and you take this, right, and you can see this directly in the URL, directly in the browser. So the requested parameters is API key, and you can see it's asking for your API key, right? So in order to add a request parameter, you put a question mark and then the API key, and then equals, and then you're going to put your API key in there. So let's go back to where I was just at to get my API key, and we put that in there, right? And right now there's no total count because I didn't query anything, right? So we look for the query string, and right here, this is the queue. This means what do you want to search for, basically. So we attach an and, which means I want to add another query to the URL, and queue equals, and then whatever you want to search for. So it can be pets, right? And then you get this big JSON object of pets, Giphies, right? And you can also add a limit. I only want 20. I want to offset 5, so you can do like pagination, things like that, right? So for now, to make this simple, we'll just go ahead and I would put a limit of 20 on there. A limit equals 20, just so that, I don't have too many coming out, right? So like I said, we're gonna do this in React. So we're going to use create React app to do this. And create React app is a way to quickly set up a React application. You basically just run this command, cd into it, and then you start it. Simple. So I'm going to open up my terminal. I'm using iterm2, and I'm going to go ahead and create a directory. So I'm going to say mkdir, and then do search. And I'm going to go ahead and run the script that comes with create React app, and it'll just be npx create React app and then the name of your app. So npx create create React app, and we'll just call it search, right? And this is going to take some time to finish. So basically, it's just going to give you a boilerplate React application, and then you can go ahead and just get started writing React right away. So give this a second and to bundle up and everything, and then we can get started. All right, so once it's finished, you can go ahead and look at these instructions here. Basically, you want to seed into search and run yarn start. So search is the application that we just made from create React app. And if we do ls, it'll show us all the files that's inside of this folder. And you can see if you do a cat package.json, we can see in here that it has a start script. This scripts object basically allows you to quickly run commands directly with npm from this application. So you can run yarn start or npm start, and it'll run React scripts start. So basically that just starts the application, right? So you run yarn start, and it'll start the development server and open up this new tab, and then there's your React app, right? So let's go ahead and open this up in our code editor, and I'm going to use WebStorm for this tutorial. A second here. Now let's go ahead and look for that application wherever I put it. Now, don't remember where I put that. It is inside of search, right? So we're gonna open this up. Okay. All right, so a traditional React application looks sort of like this. So we have our CSS file, we have app.js, we have index.js. This basically right here renders the application. So if we look, let's go through this for a second. So basically what's happening is we're importing React and React DOM. React is the library that we're using. And React DOM, it renders this one component here, which is the app component. Anything inside of this will be rendered inside of an element that is named root. So it's looking for an ID named root, and you can find that ID inside of this index.html file. This is the main index.html file. Applications like this have one big JavaScript file, right? So this is the HTML file. It's just one HTML file. This is a JavaScript application, and it's looking for this ID of root, right? So it'll find this, and it'll just plop all of the JavaScript directly into this, right? And then that's how we're able to navigate and see everything. So going back, if we look at app.js, this is going to be everything that's going to be in there. So they're plopping this div and all this stuff into that root element inside of the index.html file, and that's where you eventually see all of this on the screen. So now we want to delete all this, right? Let's just delete everything. Let's delete app.css. Let's delete the test and index.css. We have index.js. We want to make sure we delete any imports to it, because if it tries to import a file that doesn't exist, it will fail. So we don't need the logo, so we'll delete that as well. And yeah, so I think that should be a clean slate. So it's just a blank white page, right? So we also said we wanted to use React Spring, which is an animation library. So basically the idea is that when we autocomplete, we want these things to animate up towards us, right? So this is a very nice animation library that we're going to use. So I'm seeding into search, and I'm going to do a yarn install React Spring, or yarn add React Spring. If you're using npm, you would type in npm install. So yarn add React Spring, and that's going to add React Spring into our package.json file. We also want to do yarn. We're also going to use Redux as well. Redux is a state management library that allows you to basically use state from anywhere within your application. So we're going to add Redux, and we're also going to add Redux Saga, which uses generator functions in order for you to, allows you to basically write asynchronous code within your React application using Redux as well. So we're going to add those two packages. And all right, so in here, I like to write clean code. So we're going to organize this properly. We're going to have a store, right? And we're going to have a file that is going to be create store. Let's just call it that, .js. And in here, let's see, we want to import so what we want to do is we want to import create store from Redux. We want to have import create Saga middleware from Redux Saga. Now we need some reducers, we need some sagas in order for us to set up our store. So before we even do this, I'm going to just have this in the back burner for now, and we want to go ahead and start setting up our application for calling this API, right? So basically what we're going to do is we're going to have a search field, right? Let's have a search field here. So we're going to say, we're going to create a folder called components. And in here, we're going to add a file called search dot, and actually I'll make this a directory called search. So this will be search, and I will have index.js, and basically I'll import React from React. I'll say function search, and I will export default search, right? And then return some JSX, which is just HTML in JavaScript. And if I type in, let's just type in hello, right? And then we want to go back to app.js. We want to import search from components search, and then we just render it as a component, right? And if we go into that, this is just hello, right? So if we look in the browser here, we have hello, right? Okay, so what we want to do now is let's go ahead and turn this into an input field. So we're going to have an input, and this is going to be where we search for things, right? So I'm going to open up my dev tools so I can give you, so we can look at the dev tools as we do this. So this is an input field, and basically nothing's going on with it. Nothing's happening with it. So we want to add React to it. We want to be able to search for the Giphy API and then render the results right away. So what we're going to do is we're going to write, we're going to have on change. This is going to occur every time the user types something into the input field. So we're going to have, we're going to basically just call a function inside of that. So I'm going to say function, or I'll say, I like to do const on input change equals, and this is just an anonymous, this is just basically a variable that is called an anonymous function. And for situations like this, you probably want to use a regular function. In this case, on input change, because each time this clicks, each time this calls all right, so this is going to need so basically inside of this, we're going to call a function. And so basically we'll just call it on input change. So we'll just say function on input change, right? And inside of this, it's going to have a event. So if we put on input change inside of here, and we console.log the event, and then reload the page, hey, every time we type, the event is logged into the DevTools. Now, if we want to get the value out of the event, we can run e.target.value, right? And that'll give us whatever we typed into it. So hello is printed out. Now, how are we going to use this to call the API? So basically what we want to do is we have this API here, right? Let's go ahead and let's create another function, call API, right? And if I say, this is the API right here, right? So let's put this in a comment. And when we type this in the browser, it just renders JSON. So what we want to do is, we know that we're searching this. So we'll go ahead and create a base URL, which is pointing to /gifs, and then we're doing /search as well, and then the query string, right? We also have the API key on there, and this can be inside of an env file, but for now, we'll just go ahead and just print it out, hard code it out. And all we need to do is add the query string. So an easy way to do this would be to put this in a template string, right? And basically this allows you to add code within this string. So we want to construct and q equals. So we'll write $, and then these brackets, and anything in here you can add. So right here you see we hard coded pets. But since we're typing it, we can go ahead and add whatever we typed in, remember? So we can do e.target.value in there. And that'll just put in anything that's in there. And then we can go ahead and just add limit equals 20, like that, right? So this is the URL, right? So we say const URL equals that, right? So that's the URL that we want to use. And make sure that we have, I'll just put this in here, and we'll get to that part later, but I'll just put this in here for now. All right, so this is the URL that we're going to use. Now, to call the API, we're going to use Axios, which is just a package that allows you to call APIs, right? So we're going to do yarn add Axios. Some people use fetch, some people use Ajax. Axios works as well. All right, so we're going to import Axios from Axios. And after we call this API, we're going to use Redux Saga in order to debounce the API. And it's a really cool way, so stick with me on this one. So we're going to say, we're going to use async await in order for this to work. So in JavaScript, whenever we call this API, it's going to turn into a promise, right? So it's asynchronous. So if we put async onto this function, we can go ahead and write const data equals Axios, Axios.get, and then we pass in the URL. So we want to get whatever it is in this URL, right? If we console.log data right here, we will get a promise. right? So it's telling you, hey, I'm gonna execute this code, so just bear with me. Basically, it's like I'll do it later. So what you can do is you can write await. If you want this to happen synchronously, you write await, and then it'll print out whatever the data is. And if you look, we have some data, and it has a object here of a bunch of GIFs, right? And this is the URL for the GIFs. So very nice. Now, if we look in here, we can access these URLs with data.data, I believe. So data.data, and then it's the array. So is it data.data.data? Data.data.data in order to get to it. Yeah, so if we do data.data.data, we get all of the 25 GIFs in here. All right, so going back to it. Now, what do we want to do with this, right? All we're doing right now is logging it. So what we want to do is we want to save this in state, right? So that we can print it on the screen. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go ahead and use Redux. Just for demonstration purposes. We don't have to use Redux. We can use React. But I think it would be good if people could understand how to use Redux and Redux Saga and everything. So right now, before we even use reducers and all that, we're going to call this API from Redux Saga, right? So let's go into... So let's go ahead and create. So inside of search, I'm going to create a folder called Redux. And then inside of here, I'm going to create a file called SearchReducer.js. Now for the reducer, I'm going to use immutable.js. For state changes, yarn add immutable. All right. So I'm going to say import map and from JS, from immutable. And a reducer needs to have some sort of initial state, right? And basically with a reducer, it allows you to basically change code and then use it anywhere you want throughout the application. So I'm going to say const initial state is equal to map, and inside of it, I'm going to have all of my search results, right, inside of this. So we can see the search results anywhere throughout the application. So we're also going to say const search reducer is equal to a function. And what we're going to do in here is we're going to have state is equal to the initial state. So by default, I want it to be equal to the initial state here, which is this immutable map object. And we're going to have an action that's going to come through with this reducer. I'm going to export default this search reducer. So the reducer is going to have a state and it's going to have action. It's going to dispatch an action, and then it'll just run some sort of piece of code that changes state. That's all the search reducer does. All right. So we're going to use a switch statement. This is probably going to, we don't really need a switch statement, but I'm going to do action.type. And we're going to look for, and I think best practice for this would be to create a types.js file. And we would export default and objects, which basically would have all of the types, all of the dispatch types that we're going to use for this reducer. So we're going to have, let's see, add search results. And it's going to be add search results. Right, so it's going to be all the types that we're expecting inside of Redux. So we're gonna say we want to import types from types. So from types, and we're gonna do types dot. We're gonna do case types dot add search results, and whenever this dispatch is called, it will run some sort of function. So what we're gonna do is Immutable has this function called merge. So we're gonna do state.merge, and we want, basically what we're going to do is we're going to change a piece of the state within this merge, right? So we're going to say we want the search results to be equal to whatever is inside of the actions, and I guess I'll call it results. So action.results, and it will return that. By default, I'll go ahead and just return the state, and that should be it for that. Now we need to create the store. We don't have a store yet. All we have is this one search reducer. That's it. So we need to create a store. So we're going to say import create store from Redux. We're going to need and good practice is to have a root reducer. So we're going to have a root reducer, which just takes all of your reducers and puts it into one. So we're going to say import combine reducers from Redux, and we're going to export default combine reducers, and basically I'm going to just say search, and then inside of here we want to have our search reducer from the components search Redux search reducer, right? So what this is doing is it's combining all of your reducers into one. So in order to access the reducer, you're gonna say like state.search and then search results, right? So that's how it's gonna work. And then inside of create store, we're gonna have we're gonna import our root reducer from root reducer, and then after that, say import create Saga middleware from Redux Redux Saga, right? We're going to say const Saga middleware equals create Saga middleware, and it's a function, right? This is how we're going to set up our sagas, our reducers, and our store. This is say const store equals create store, and we're going to add in the root reducer, and we're going to apply the middleware for the Saga middleware, just like that. And this should actually be root reducer, and we want to also export default to store, because I'm going to import the store into app. And underneath this, we want to have the Saga middleware, we want it to run, right? That's what we want. And we want to pass in the root Saga. So right now, we don't have any sagas at all. So let's go ahead and create a Saga. Now, so right now, all we have right now is we have this store that is passing in the root reducer. The root reducer has a combine reducers, which we only have one reducer, so really this is overkill. But if you're building a bigger application, this will be useful. We have a combine reducers, which just puts all of our reducers together. And then this reducer here, basically just whenever this is dispatched, types.add search results. So later on, we're going to dispatch out an event that's going to have a type called add search results. And then it's going to hit this reducer. And this is all Redux specific stuff. It's going to hit this reducer when you dispatch it. And then it's going to change the search results in state, right? And later on, we can use that state to view it, right? So we need to create a Saga, right? And this is how we're going to call the APIs. So this is how we're going to do this. We're going to say, I'm going to say search Saga. I'm just going to say search Saga. Now, Sagas use generator functions. It can look cryptic at first, but it's relatively straightforward. We want to import take latest. We want to import put and call from Redux Saga /effects. Take latest means I want to take the latest. So if you type in you type in J, you type in HEL, I want to take the latest one, which will be L, right? So I'm going to say function set search, and I'm going to call a function called watch search. Okay. Now yield is kind of like async await, where it runs synchronously. So if you run yield, it'll run each code synchronously, one by one, instead of using promises and doing it asynchronously. So what we want to do is we want to say yield take latest. And let's go ahead and edit our types. So we're going to say watch get search results. Say watch get search results. And inside of the Saga, we're going to import our type. So say import types from types. And we're just going to say types.watch get search results. So with Redux Saga, whenever we dispatch out this event, and you'll see later on, this will make more sense later on, where we dispatch out the event, and then Redux Saga will catch the event, and it'll look for this, and it'll run a function. The function we want to run is SetSearch. So after this event is dispatched, it'll run SetSearch, right? And inside of SetSearch, what we want to do, we want to call the API. So all this code that we wrote in here to call the API, we're going to put inside of this Saga right here. So this is asynchronous, and we'll be able to call a reducer from within this Saga. So let's put this in a try catch. So if it passes, we'll continue. If it fails, right? So we'll just log that out. So remember, we have our URL, our data from this, right? And instead of using async, we will use yield because it's a generator function, and then console log the data, right? Now, where are we going to get this from? e.target.value, that's not in there, right? So what do we want to do? We want to dispatch out this function. Now, before we even do that, we don't even have access to Redux at the moment because we haven't finished creating our store. So let's export default to search, and then let's finish creating the store. So we want to import the Saga, right? Now, good practice is to have a root Saga. And we want to import the search Saga in here from components, search, Redux, search Saga. And we also want to import fork and all from Redux Saga. Okay, so just like with the combined reducers, you can do it with Sagas as well. So we'll say function root Saga. And with this, it's going to be a generator function, and Sagas use generators. I'm going to yield all, and it's going to be an array, and it's going to fork the search Saga, just like that. Okay, and then we'll export default the root Saga. So later on, if you were to add more Sagas, you could do, fork another Saga, right? Just like that. So I'm going to go ahead and import this root Saga from root Saga from root Saga, right? And I'm gonna put that into the Saga middleware. So it'll run this root Saga after the store is called. So inside of app.js, we want the store. So we need to set up Redux. So we're gonna say import provider from Redux. Actually, this provider needs to come from React Redux. So in order to set up Redux, we need another package called So in order to set up Redux, we need another package called React Redux, right? And this will allow us to connect Redux into our components. So we're going to import provider from React Redux. And basically what we want to do is we want to wrap our component in a provider, and a provider takes a store, right? So we just created our store here. We export defaulted it, so we need to import it into our app. So we're going to say import store from store, and then create store, right? We're going to take the store and we're going to import it in there. So now we have access to the store. So now that we have access to the store, Redux is fully connected. All right, so after we imported connect from React Redux, we want to actually connect it to the component. So this is just basically an higher component that will allow us to change the properties within this function. So the next step that we want to do is we want to create a function or a object called map dispatch to props. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to have an action, and that action is going to have a type and a value, right? And we're going to dispatch out that action, and then later on, this Saga will catch that action and then run this function, basically. So we need an action, right? So we'll go ahead and we'll create an action. We'll say action.js, and we will import the types from the types. And inside of the types, we want to dispatch out an action called watch get search results, because our Saga is listening for that same action, so we can eventually run this function. And Redux and Redux Saga handles all this for us, so all we have to do is just dispatch out the action. So we'll just go ahead and say export const, and we'll say get search results, and that will be, we'll have a type, and types will be watch get search results, and then it'll also have a value. So that value is going to be whatever the user types in, right? So when we dispatch out this action, we'll have a type so they know which action we're dispatching and who needs to catch it, and we'll pass in a value so we have some data to reference whenever we call that API. So going back here, we'll go ahead and we'll import get search results from the action, and we'll pass it into map dispatch to props. And connect takes a state function, and it also takes this map dispatch to props object. So in here we can pass in map state to props, and this will basically allow us to use whatever state is on the store. But here it allows us to map certain functions or action creators onto the component so that we can use that later on. So if we console.log props, we'll see on here that we have this function right here, get search results, and that'll allow us to do props.get search results, and then that'll basically dispatch out that action, and then this Saga will catch it because this action has the same one, watch get search results. This action is listening for watch get search results, and it'll later on run this function which will call the API and console log the data. So going back, we'll go ahead and do that. So we'll say props dot get search results, and we'll pass in e.target.value. e.target.value is going to be what the user had typed in. So we can also say e.target.value.trim is not equal to an empty string. And basically what this will do is say if the string is not empty, then go ahead and run this function. So this should work. Let's take a look. We say, and there we go. So I typed in H and I got a bunch of different, I got a response back from the API for a bunch of different GIFs. Now I think I've never used this before, so we're probably going to use images and then original or something like that in order to show the GIFs later on. So now that we're actually calling that API and the Saga is actually getting registered here, we want the reducer to know about these results so we can later on use that in another component. So right now we have it set up so that when this action is called, it will take whatever the results is on that action and pass it into this state and merge it in. So what we can do right now is we can say, we'll say return yield put. Put allows you to basically dispatch out another action to a reducer, basically. So we can call another action, which will be like, let's say export const set search results. So this will be a way for us to set the results in the reducer, right? So this will be types and then be types dot set search results. It'll take in some results as well, right? So we'll do that, and right here we want to import it into the Saga results from action, and then we'll set that and we'll pass in the results, which is just data, right? So basically what's going to happen is this API call will happen. It'll go into data, and then we'll dispatch out another action called set search results, passing in the results. So this reducer is listening for that action, and it'll merge in those results from that function, from that object action. So if we console.log the action, we'll see that the reducer was hit afterwards. So see, boom. And it has a type, which is set search results, and it has the results on it. And that's what we're going to use in order to put inside of this initial state, right? So now that we have that, we're all set to go in order for us to start rendering out the results. So we can create another folder called results and index.js. So this is what I love about Redux. These two components are just completely oblivious of each other. Redux connects those components together. So we can import React from React, and we can say function results and return just an empty export default results, right? And back in the app, we want this component to be on the page. So what do we want to do? We want to get the search results back from the store after the API call was registered, right? So we want to import connect from React Redux, and we'll go ahead and connect it. And this is how this is going to work. We're going to have a function called MapState to props. So we're going to say const MapState to props equals states, and we'll return that back. So what's going to happen is this is a way for us to map the state from the store and use it in our properties. So what's the state that we want to use? The state that we want to use is basically going to be search results, because that's what we're merging in and changing. Initial state is going to be an empty array, and then afterwards we're going to pass in the results. So inside here we're going to have search results, and this is where I was talking about before, where the root reducer is going to map. You're going to do state.search results. That's how we're going to map it, because we're using combined reducers in order to organize this better. So it's going to be state.search and then search results, right? And then we're going to pass that in as the first property. And then if we look inside of props here, inside of results, it's going to be an empty array at first. So search results, well, it's undefined right now, and that's because search results is using immutable.js. So since this is an immutable object, we can't just reference it like that. We have to do .get like that, right? So going back, we look at it and it's an array, right? An empty array, just array 0, right? So now what we want to do is we want to see, so if we look right here, if we actually type, it gets updated, right? It gets updated because we dispatched out the action to the Saga. The Saga then called the API. The Saga then dispatched out the action to the Reducer. The Reducer then updated the state, and then the component knew about it because it's connected to Redux, and then it eventually updated its own component to reference the new state from the Reducer. So, and that's from here. So if we look at it, and this is all immutable stuff, you don't really need to understand all the stuff that's going on here, but because later on we're going to actually convert this to a regular object. But if we look here, there's just a bunch of data here that is from the search results. It's the same object that we had before. So what we're going to do is we want to map through this, right? So what we'll say is if props.search results, if there is search results, right? Otherwise, we'll just return null if there isn't, and if there is, we want to render search results. And what this will be a function that will just render out the search results. So basically what we'll do is we'll pass in the search results, right? So this will be props.search results. It will pass that in, and we will map through it. We'll say search results dot, and for this one, I'll just go ahead and say .2js, because that'll change it into a regular JavaScript array object instead of like a immutable object. So search results.2js .map, and then I'll say result, and then I will return a div that just says result for now, so I can just see that this is working, and I will return it. Let's see if this doesn't throw an error, and it does. 2JS is not a function, and that is happening because it may be passing this argument here. So let me do search results dot map, and then let's just log out result.2js. So we'll do that instead, and we'll say h, and there we go. So we got a bunch of different objects here that we can use in order to print out the Giphies that we are calling from the API, right? And we want to, animate this into the page. So we're going to need to create another component, and I'm just going to call it result.js. And with that, I'm just going to import React from React, and I'll just say function result, and I will return a here and then export default results like that. And in here, what I'll do is I'll pass in the result that I just created, the component I just created, and I'm gonna pass on a property so it knows what I'm using, right? So each component, it's gonna render this result component, and each result component will have its own property that references the result inside of this map function. So right here, I could just reference result and then just do the same thing that I was doing before. So if I log out result, I should see what I saw before, right? So type it in, and there we go. And then, so what do we want to do? This is basic, right? We want to just have an image tag that references that result. So what was it again? So if we do result.2js and we look at it, we need to see what it was. It was images.original.url. So result.2js.images.original.url, right? And that's what we're going to use in order to print inside of the image tag. So we'll have our image tag, image source will equal result, and then that. So if we look at this, let's see, let's make sure that the images show up. We type in H, and there it is. Boom, we got a bunch of different Giphy images coming in from that API, right? Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to try to animate this up, right? So we can use React Spring for that. So we'll say something like, we'll just use Spring. So we'll say React Spring, we'll import Spring from React Spring render props, right? And the way this works is we have this Spring component, and it takes some properties. Let's look at the documentation here. So React Spring, and inside of render props, there's a Spring API right here, and it takes a from and to property, all right? So that's what it takes, and then inside of that, it takes this object here that just maps it to that underlying component, right? So we'll pass that in like that, just like this, and we'll call this Spring props, just in case if you had props up here, it doesn't bother with that. And I'll put this inside of these brackets here. Actually, I'll just leave it like this, and I'll pass in this image tag right here. And what I'll do is I'll put a style tag inside of Spring props, and basically what that'll do is it'll just set the opacity to 0 and opacity to 1 whenever the component is mounted. So take a look, and you see they all kind of like show the opacity like so. See what I'm saying? So if you want to make this look a little bit cooler, you can say transform translates y 30 pixels, and when it gets here, we'll translate it 0 pixels, like that. And if we do this again, it animates up like that. So another thing that we can do is we can do this one at a time. So the way to do that is inside of the map comes with an iterator. So it has 0, 1, 2, 3. We can pass this iterator into this component, and we can use that. So each one will have its own number that it references. So inside of here, Spring comes with a config option here, and you can delay it. So we'll delay it by whatever the iterator is times, let's say, 100. So when we do that, what will happen is it'll get animated one at a time. You see, animated one at a time. It looks pretty. Now we can definitely make this a whole lot prettier. We can style it, do absolutely anything. The sky's the limit with this. But this is just a way for you to get the architecture started, architecture set up, and everything. Now, how I would go about styling this, I would use a package called styled components. So let me give you just a brief example of how I would go about that. Basically, what we do is, let's see, where would we want to start here? Probably around the results index. We're mapping the results, so we want to probably style right here. Let's say we want these to get animated to the left. We could just say something like, let's see, div, we're doing the search results here. Let's see, style equals, or you know what, let's do this. We'll say in here, I will put inside a result, let's do div style equals display inline block. And this side of result. Now let's see what that does. So we say H, and there we go. So that already makes it side by side, right? we can probably do something like inside of search. And usually you wouldn't want to do this inline styling like this. You can always do something like import styled from styled components. And style components allows you to style components and use it in a React way. So I usually create another file called styled.js, and I import styled from styled components, and then I just say const, let's say, what are we doing? This result wrapper equals styled.div. And inside of these, you can basically just do any kind of CSS styling you were doing before, which is display inline block, like so. And then we can take this result wrapper and import it from styled, and we need to export that as well, style.div, and then we can put it over top, and basically that will do the same exact thing we just did. So if you say, and there we go, right? Now, same thing for the search component. We can also do that. We can have a styled file that just imports styled from styled components, and we can get this wrapper, this div wrapper, and let's say we did like export const search wrapper equals style.div, and let's say we just did like width 100%, height 300 pixels, background, what would be the background? Let's say background, I don't know. It really doesn't matter. You can always make this look absolutely gorgeous if you wanted to. But let's just say display flex, justify content center, align items center, and let's bring this search wrapper in, and then put it in there. And it's not gonna look the prettiest, but let's say we have that, right? And I really hate this color. Let me see. I have this tool here where I can just take some random colors off the page. I kind of like this color. Let's see. Put this on here. Do I like this color? I don't know. It's better than nothing. So we have that, and we can also style the input as well. So export const input style equals style.input, and in there we can go ahead and just say like width 60%, height 30 pixels, border radius 10 or something like that, and just pass in input style in there and then put it on there. And if we look, we have that, and probably take the border off, border none, so there's nothing like that, and probably take the outline off, outline none, so you can do that, and maybe add some padding left 20 pixels, right, like that. And then we probably want to move the results down a little bit. So this results wrapper here, we probably want to say like, margin top 20 pixels or something like that. Move it down like so. And obviously we can make these pictures look prettier too. We can, format them a lot better and everything. But for now, I also want to touch up on another point here. A lot of times you don't want to hit an API too many times. You don't want your user just typing away, hitting the API and like burning out your server. So what you can do is you can use this thing called debounce, and debounce allows you to basically call this Saga every certain amount of milliseconds. So we can say only call this API every 1,000 milliseconds. So when we do this again, it won't show up until we're finished and the 1000 milliseconds is done. So we'll say programming. Oop, I spelled that wrong. Programming, right? And there it is. It waited for me to finish typing and correct myself and showed up the programming results, right? And yeah, so we can always make this look a whole lot prettier. We can always do the absolute most with this. But for the meantime, this gets you started on setting up the architecture and everything. And I'm glad you stuck with me throughout this. And I'll talk to you guys later.